Hello and welcome to Big Talk with Todd and Noah. We are officially here. It is officially week one, and we are officially ready for some games. Week 0 marked the return for college football, but now we get to return, Todd, and I feel like
That's right.
the energy is different already.
Yeah, it's going to be a blast. I mean, what more could you ask for? We're opening up at the home of the defending national champions in a game that is probably going to be better than a lot of people
Yeah.
anticipate. So yeah, what a great way to start.
Well, let's go right into it. And first down for us here today is a couple of the Big Ten teams in particular. We start with our matchup and a Michigan team against a Fresno State team that won 9 games last year and the previous 2 seasons won 10 plus. You look at what they bring back. There's still a lot of returning consistency, new coach with Jeff Tedford having to step down with health issues. But what are you looking for as we get set for Michigan and Fresno State Saturday?
Yeah, well, first of all, starting with Fresno State, since you led with them, even though Jeff Tedford stepped down and he's an outstanding football coach, I think his fingerprints will still be very much on the team. The coordinators are the same, so I think the system and everything will be pretty much the same. There might be a few wrinkles that McCann brings in as the OC, but very much the same kind of team. This is a team that you mentioned won 9 games. They started out 8-1. And then they hit a slide down the stretch. Tedford stepped down. They played really well in the bowl game with Skipper as the interim head coach, and he starts the season that way. So they're a team that has a lot of skill. Defensively, they struggled at times last year, which will be a challenge for them in this game. But offensively, I remember studying them last year because we had Purdue early in the year, and they went to Purdue, a Big Ten team, and beat them in the last part of the game. And Mikey Keene, the quarterback, threw the ball exceptionally well. So they've got skill, they've got talent. I think they'll come in with swagger. Fresno State reminds me of like a Boise State team that, they're not afraid to play anybody. I mean, they'll go play anybody. And early in the year is when you want to play a team like Michigan if you're Fresno State, because the biggest difference between a Michigan and a Fresno State is as the season wears on, the quality depth is not the same with a Fresno State as it is with a Michigan. And so, but early in the year, when they should be as healthy as they can be, this is their best shot to go in there and play well.
With that, Fresno State, you mentioned Mikey Keene coming back. You have Malik Sherrod at running back coming back. It's an offensive line that's expected to return 4 starters on top of that. So you've got experience offensively, including on the outside with 2 of their top receivers returning. You mentioned defense being the real question mark, let's call it, for the Bulldogs. You go up against a Michigan team that, while they're not returning necessarily a ton of starters, the interesting thing about Michigan is we saw them a bunch last year. They were, 3-4 deep at every position.
Yeah.
So guys who necessarily aren't starters a year ago will be starters now, and they bring a ton of experience back with them.
They do, and the challenge for Fresno State in this ball game, not just coming across the country, not just playing in front of 100,000 plus, where they're used to playing in front of 40-some thousand at home, but they will not face an offense or defensive line anywhere comparable to Michigan when they play in the Mountain West Conference. So, they're going to have their hands full up front. Michigan wins games in the trenches. The last 3 years, the Big Ten champions, they've bludgeoned people. And even teams that have equal talent, they've been better up front. Offensive line is all new. All 5 of those starters last year are somewhere in the NFL, may not make a full roster, but they're there right now. And then defensively, this is an outstanding defensive front. They were the best defense in the country last year. They may not reach that same level, but their 2 inside tackles of Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham are the best duo of interior defensive linemen in college football. And so Fresno State, even though they've got some experience on their offensive line, they're going to look across and see these dudes and say, whoa, we don't see guys like this in the Mountain West Conference.
Yeah, you might say Jesse Minter's gone, but you're bringing Wink Martindale. It's the same system. He originated, he calls himself the OG of this defensive system. Not to mention, they can cut off half the field with Will Johnson at cornerback.
Right.
He might be the best corner in the country, or at least he's in that conversation. So very exciting to see what they look like to repeat their title and their title defense here. We'll get back to Michigan a little bit later in the show, but just real quick, USC is a top 25 team preseason. as we talked about last week, I know you're not a big preseason poll type of guy because we got to see what these teams look like.
Right.
Case in point, Florida State last week. But with that being said, USC and LSU week 1 is a fun matchup at Allegiant Stadium, I believe. That's correct. Yeah, in Vegas. So top 25 matchup. What do you look for in this one?
Yeah, of all the Big Ten teams opening the season this year, I think this is the hardest matchup for a Big Ten team, at USC playing LSU. Now, the good news is they're playing in Vegas and not in Baton Rouge. They're not playing them down in Death Valley in the heat and humidity of Baton Rouge. But from a talent standpoint, this is still an elite level team in LSU. Nussmeier takes over as the quarterback. Very similar stories for these two teams. Actually, it's an interesting matchup because you have Nussmeier takes over. He took over for Jaden Daniels, who sat out the bowl game, played well, right? You've got Miller Moss taking over at quarterback for USC. He took over for Caleb Williams when he opted out of the bowl game, played exceptionally well. So they both should be confident guys. They've been in the system. They know what they're doing offensively. The biggest question is, can either one of them improve dramatically on defense? And we'll see that on display. So Danton Lynn comes over from UCLA, did a great job with the Bruins defense. He's now the head defensive coordinator at USC. And LSU went out and got a new coordinator coming from Missouri who was actually exceptional there too. So the big downfall for both of these teams in the last couple of years has been their inability to play defense. And for LSU, that's the most surprising thing, because this was a program that for years was built on outstanding defense. I mean, I can remember the days when them and Alabama were playing regular season knockdown, drag out games that ended up as a 9-6 ball game. They both played that kind of defense, and it's not, they've been a long way from that here in the last few years.
I also kind of showcases the modern game a little bit. And obviously we know what Lincoln Riley's teams have looked like from Oklahoma all the way to LA. I do want to hit real quick before we move on to second down, number 8, Penn State and West Virginia. Yeah. This was the season opener we had last year. It was at Penn State a year ago. It'll be at West Virginia on Saturday, but the Drew Aller experience, it feels like that's the biggest question mark. What does he do in taking another step forward? Because if he can, Penn State's a legitimate threat around the country.
Well, it'll be really interesting to watch. I mean, he was very efficient with the ball last year, did a lot of really good things as a first-year starter. Number one, he took care of the football, right. 25 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions. The problem was they did not have enough explosive plays. Part of that might have been him not wanting to pull the trigger, because sometimes you need to throw the ball downfield. A guy can't be wide open. You have to maybe throw a guy open or trust your receivers to go up and make a 50-50 play. He didn't do that enough. Part of it might have been play calling, conservative. That's why they made a switch by the end of the year and offensive coordinators. Now a new guy comes in from Kansas, Andy Koltonicki. So we'll see what that looks like. And then wide receiver, I just think that that's been a little bit of an area of weakness for the last couple of years. I don't know that they really upgraded that position. We'll see how they look, but they need more explosive plays in the pass game. They've got their 2 running backs back. Their offensive line should be pretty solid. They're good at tight end, but can they get explosive downfield plays from their quarterback and wide receiver? Now, this game coming up, I mentioned USC, LSU. That's probably the toughest test for a Big Ten team. I think this is the second toughest test because we did that game last year. It was 38-15. It was much closer than the score indicated. West Virginia played well. They were able to run the football. I was very impressed with their quarterback, Garrett Green, last year. He's back, so he's a confident guy, plays with a lot of swagger. And I've played in Morgantown. It is not an easy place to play. It's a noon kickoff. That place will be rocking, and the home field advantage for West Virginia. So Penn State's going to have to really be on their A game in this ball game, because West Virginia is a pretty solid team. And Neil Brown, when we started the year last year, he was on the hot seat. They didn't know if he could keep his job. They ended up winning 9 games, finished really strong. So they're in a really good place right now, and I know they're anxious for this game against Penn State.
Neil Brown deserves a lot of credit. They lose Zach Frazier, who was one of the best centers in the country, but they do have usually stout offensive linemen. That they're going to be sized up well. against the Penn State. So that should be a fun matchup week 1 as we move over to second down. Just more so the questions around a lot of the new in the conference. One of the newer potential pieces that we'll see is an Iowa offense. And this is going to start with Kirk Ferentz now away for this first game, suspended for one game to start the season because of recruiting stuff with their quarterback, Cade McNamara, coming over from Michigan. We saw McNamara go down last year with the ACL. He should be back through this season. But they bring in Tim Lester as the offensive coordinator after letting Brian Ferentz go. So I guess the question for them is, what does it look like offensively? Because that's always the question with Iowa. And we know Phil Parker, we know their defense, we know they're going to be consistently great on that side of the football. But offensively, what do they realistically need to take that next step in the conference?
Well, I think some big plays out of their offense, and most of that is going to come in the passing game. So I'm interested to see what Tim Lester brings to the table, and hopefully all that pressure that was on them last year, you got to score 25 or more, or Brian Ferentz doesn't keep his job. That was too much pressure on him.
Yeah.
It was too much pressure on the players. So hopefully all that is out the window now, and it's a clean slate and a fresh start for the Iowa offense. And so I expect to see them better, and they don't have to be great. They don't have to be on the same level as an Ohio State offensively, right?
Sure.
And that explosive. They just need to take some pressure off their defense. They need to be able to sustain drives. They need to be able to score some touchdowns and play complementary football with their defense at a higher level than they've done the last couple years.
I mean, they were still an outstanding team.
Yeah.
They've got running backs back.
It's just their passing game that has 100%. To be better.
Well, Kirk Ferentz is trained as an offensive line coach. We know their offensive line is going to be up to snuff. We know their running game is going to be up to snuff. The passing game has always been the question mark. Are they going to be able to have legit receiving threats? They really haven't even had those. The tight ends are always outstanding.
Yeah. Well, and remember last year, not only did they lose McNamara, they lost their tight end, who was an outstanding player early in the year. And that just really hampered their offense and how they try to operate on that side of the ball.
They lost a number of tight ends, including Eric Gall, who they felt was going to be the biggest addition to their team offensively outside of McNamara coming over from Michigan with them. So 1,000%. They'll be retooled. They'll look a little bit different. But I think the other thing that, before we move on real quick, you have to remember with any of these changes, and that's what we're going to bring up with these head coaches, but certainly with coordinator changes, and I thought we saw this with Ohio State's defense last year, it generally takes a full year to get the system implemented, to get everybody comfortable with it, and really feel like you can go from 101 to 202. Ohio State's defense last year took the major step forward under Jim Knowles in year 2. It's not like they were bad year 1, but just think about the difference between those two.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we'll talk about Ohio State a little bit, but I expect them to take an even bigger jump in year 3 for two big reasons. Number one, I think his complexity will come out more because he's got a veteran group that a lot of those guys came back, some of them that could have gone to the NFL, wanted to come back to take care of business. I think they'll pressure the quarterback better. I think they'll disguise coverage better. I think they'll just be more complex. And they just are a very talented defensive football team. They've got outstanding players on that side of the ball. So I think the third year for Jim Knowles for the Ohio State defense, they're going to be one of the best, if not the best defense in college football.
All right, just real quick, we look at the new head coaches in this conference in Michigan State and Indiana in particular. Michigan State has FAU here week 1. Indiana has FIU week 1 Saturday. So just the overall outlook for the season and their week 1 matchups for both as they take over new programs.
Yeah, very interesting and very interested to watch both of them because I really have great respect for both of these head coaches. First of all, Jonathan Smith, did a great job at Oregon State. He played there. He was a good player, a good quarterback. He was an outstanding coach there. And the interesting thing, and this had to have played a little bit into the fact of him getting hired by Michigan State, but he's at Oregon State, right? And the best and the brightest son in that state is Oregon, right? The Ducks. So he's coaching at the other place and does well, holds his own, wins, builds a program that's built on being physical and running the football and play action, and did a great job. So now he goes to Michigan State. And the best and the brightest school is University of Michigan, right? It's not Michigan State necessarily. So he inherits the same kind of a job, a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, a lot of roster overhaul, So it'll be interesting to see just kind of what their roster looks like. But Aiden Childs, the quarterback that he brought with him from Oregon State, is legit,
and confident.
and confident. He's used to winning. He came from a winning program, right? So now he's in a new setting, and he still feels like, why can't we win, right? So if he can pull a lot of guys up with him and feel that way, it'll be interesting to watch. And getting off to a great start in this opening game, I think will be really important. Same thing for Indiana. Indiana needs to get off to a great start. Kurt Cignetti, big chip on his shoulder, right? I mean, he is a winner. Everywhere he's been a winning coach. Had a great record at JMU, right? And had some really good players, many of which he brought with him to Indiana. So a roster overhaul in Bloomington as well. Two new head coaches that have been very successful in their previous stops. And so it'll be very fun to watch. And Indiana has a chance to get off to a very fast start, not only in this first game, but in the first 3-4 games of the season, they've got a chance to get off to a great start.
And we'll see them week 3 in UCLA in the battle of new head coaches in the Big Ten as well. Let's move on to third down. Just rapid fire, fill in the blank here. Let's start with UNC at Minnesota. We saw how good Darius Taylor was last year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that dude was an absolute stud for the Gophers. So Darius Taylor can be blank for the Gophers here in 2024.
He can be their bell cow. This is a team that is built around the running game and the running back. And most teams in college football feature the quarterback. This is a team that features the tailback, and everything kind of flows off of that. Kirk Soraka, his system, the way they play, it's built around the running game. And so, they've got a new quarterback in Max Brosmer, who comes from the FCS level, was highly decorated at that level. But make no mistake, Minnesota lives and dies, wins or loses based on how well they run the football.
They will be skew-mying all the way through on the ground. So they'll make it happen for sure. Second one to move on here is Indiana State at Purdue. Hudson Card came over. He was very much anticipated to be a guy that can help lead the charge offensively. I mean, Aiden O'Connell was outstanding in his time at quarterback at Purdue, and I think Hudson Card was underwhelming to a certain degree last year in his first season. But similar to what we talked about, year 2 versus year 1 is a very different thing. So Hudson Card needs to blank in order to help Purdue rebound in 2024.
He just needs to be a more efficient quarterback. Now he's got a year under his belt. Okay, so he has a full year of being a starter, the ups and downs of that. He needs to take care of the football, not throw as many interceptions. I think he had 8 last year. He did some good things. He just has to do it on a more consistent basis. Put his team in favorable situations, play complementary football. His head coach is a defensive-minded guy. So take care of the football. Don't put the defense in bad ways, and the big plays will happen. But be efficient running the team.
So we talked about Wisconsin last year and Luke Fickell's thought process of kind of revamping the offense a little bit and trying to modernize what the game looked like for Wisconsin with the new teams joining the Big Ten this year. And obviously the West Coast style is a lot of spread, a lot of West Coast offense, and all of the air raid that comes with that. So we saw that a little bit in Madison last year, but the air raid offense will blank under Tyler Van Dyke now at quarterback and Luke Fickell's second season in Madison.
I think it'll take a big jump in the right direction. Not just because Tyler Van Dyke. I just think all these players now have 2 years in the system. Right. It's a second year through. Really, when Malachi was pretty healthy, or Mordecai was healthy last year, they were pretty good. They were starting to get on a roll. Then he got hurt, and they had a couple receivers get nicked up. Then they lose running backs. They lost key pieces right as their offense was starting to gain some traction. So I think just having things in the second year will be better. They've got to keep their guys healthy, but I do expect that they'll take a step forward. And I think for a quarterback like Tyler Van Dyke, there's so many transfer quarterbacks across the landscape of college football. A new start, a breath of fresh air for him. It might be a little chillier air in Madison than he's used to in Miami come October and November, but I do think it's a good opportunity for him to start over.
1000%. Last one before we move over to fourth down here today. Nebraska, you were very high on Nebraska last year. It looked like they were going to achieve your prediction of bowl eligibility in year one under Matt Rule. They faltered the last 3 weeks of the season, finished 5-7. But you look at what they've got this year. They have UTEP to open the season. They've got a lot coming back defensively. They've added a lot offensively, a very talented freshman starting at quarterback. So Matt Rule's squad is capable of winning blank games this season.
I think at least 8. I really do. I think they can win 8 games. And for the reasons you said, I mean, that's a lot of pressure to put on a freshman quarterback, even if he's a 5-star, all everything, kind of a legacy player at Nebraska. But I say that because of their defense. Their defense was outstanding. Tony White, their coordinator, this is the second year for his system. He's got a couple horses up front, maybe second only to the guys that Michigan have in that league to kind of anchor that defense. But this is a really good defensive football team. They're very stingy. They're going to keep Nebraska in every game. And the biggest thing is Nebraska just has to turn the whole turnover thing the other way around. Last year, it was their undoing. Probably 2 or 3 games they could have won if they take care of the football. Even if they finish even in the turnover margin in a couple games, they win those games. So that's the biggest challenge for them. They can win 8 games. They can go to a bowl game. They got to be plus in the turnover margin when it's all said and done.
If the 2 guys at Michigan are the best 2 interior defensive linemen in the conference, it is absolutely a worthy discussion to say Nash Hutmaker is number 3. I mean, the guy was so good last year. He comes back. So I think they're going to be fun. I'm excited to see what they look like. And obviously the big game week 2, which will be NBC prime time, Big Ten Saturday night, Nebraska hosting Colorado in a rematch of one of the most fun back and forths from last year within this conference as well. Let's go to fourth down before we move on to our kind of big finale for today. Other Big Ten teams in action: Howard at Rutgers, Eastern Illinois at Illinois, Miami, Ohio at Northwestern. I did find out last year they don't like to be Miami of Ohio. It's Miami, Ohio. So I've made that
really
in my
Where'd you find that out from?
From the school. Apparently it is just Miami, Ohio. They don't like of for whatever reason. Yeah. Okay. So Miami, Ohio is at Northwestern, UConn at Maryland, UCLA at Hawaii. Worst places to start your season, I guess. Weber State at Washington. Anything in particular as we go through that list that stands out to you?
No, not really. I mean, all the Big Ten teams should be the favorite and should, come away victorious and get their season off to a good start. For UCLA, even though they're on the West Coast, it's still kind of a long road trip. The good news is they get a week off when they come back before they face Indiana at home. So important, I think, for Deshaun Foster's team to get off to a good start in their game against Hawaii. That might be the most challenging of the bunch. Miami, Ohio plays a pretty good brand of football, but what David Braun did at Northwestern last year was nothing short of miraculous. And so that's a team in Northwestern that should be very, very confident to start their season in their new little miniature lakefront stadium. I guess that one is going to be played there at their practice field where they erected the portable stands, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. How's that wind going to be? How do you feel about lake wind?
Yeah, September might be okay. It should be okay. Or August 31st. They should be okay.
November.
Tougher. Yeah,
November 10th could be tough. Yeah, that'll be interesting. All right, let's go to our Xfinity Big Connections here for today. And we stick with our matchup, which is Fresno State heading to Michigan. And we mentioned interim head coach Tim Skipper. Well, he's connected to Fresno State for quite some time. Former Bulldog, chance to lead his alma mater. He played football there as a linebacker, 97 to 2000, 3-time all-conference selection. He's been a coach within college football since 2001, but previously was with Fresno State from 06 to 2011, running back coach for a couple of years, then defensive run game coordinator for a couple of years. His brother, running back coach for the Buffalo Bills. His father, Jim, was a longtime NFL assistant. Returned to Fresno State 2022 as a linebacker coach, now takes over for Tedford after stepping down. So what sense of pride does a former player and a guy who's coached at a place before have to get back and be the head coach now of the full program? That's got to be awesome.
Yeah, it's got to be, and you could tell. I mean, he's pretty energetic, pretty effusive when he talks about the opportunity that he has. The thing I like is that the players, when they've been interviewed, they're thrilled for him to be the head coach. They like his energy, they like his juice, and it does. It means more. Jeff Tedford, Fresno was very, very important to him. I mean, he had a lot of passion for the school, and the same thing is true with Skipper. I mean, he played there, he coached there. That's a place that has a lot of history and tradition. A lot of great players have come through there, and it means something. I mean, one of my favorite all-time teammates that I ever played with was from Fresno State. When we went to Kansas City together as rookies, he was a a free agent wide receiver, Stephon Page, who ended up being a great NFL wide receiver. But so they've got a lot of pride in that program, and Tim Skipper kind of is the centerpiece of that right now.
Yeah, obviously great athletes coming through, especially in the football program recently. The Carr brothers and Devontae Adams, but you have Paul George, NBA superstar. You've got Aaron Judge, who might win another MVP this year, is on pace to shatter his own 63 home run. So he's going to continue doing what he's doing. But Fresno State definitely has a lot of pride. Let's hit our news segment, and then we want to hit our other news segment as well. But Xfinity third chair. Time now for some fan-submitted questions presented by Xfinity. And the first one is going back to Michigan, and this is where I mentioned we hit on them again. What do you think Michigan's floor and ceiling is for 2024? As mentioned, it's still a very good and talented team. It's year one under Sharon Moore officially now as the full-time head coach. He coached the 4 games last year. But what do you see as the floor and the ceiling for this team?
Well, I think that they've got a chance to have another really good season. The two things that are the biggest, ifs is the quarterback situation. Now, we're anticipating we're going to see Alex Orji as the starting quarterback. He's only attempted 1 pass in his college career. He's got a strong arm, but can he be consistent? Can he throw the ball in critical downs on 3rd and 8? 3rd and 9? Can he make those kind of throws? We know what kind of athlete he is. We know what he can add to the running game. But what about being an every down, every series starting quarterback? So there's a lot of question mark about what he looks like, what the offense looks like, how efficient they can be. And then on top of that, their schedule is more challenging than it was a year ago. With the addition of those 4 new teams, the 3 best teams coming in, arguably, are Oregon, USC, and Washington. Michigan plays all 3 of those. The only one they don't play this year is UCLA. They don't play Penn State, which would have been a challenge, but they play Texas right after this game. So it's a very difficult challenge schedule-wise. Very talented team. So floor and ceiling, I still think they can win 9, maybe 10 games. But a lot of that's going to depend on what happens at the quarterback position.
So I know Sharon Moore was asked about the quarterbacks. He's been asked a million times, but yesterday in his press conference, and he said that they're still working through things. They're still splitting reps as they head towards the season opener. But he did mention that he's seen a quarterback competition or shared, because someone asked him about if he'd be willing to share quarterbacks essentially or interchange quarterbacks. And he goes, well, I've seen that work before. I mean, we saw that with Florida with Chris Leak and Tim Tebow. That was the first thing that he said. Obviously a national champion roster, and they're coming off of a national championship.
Right.
A little bit different with these guys, but you've got Orji. And the other example I would use with Alex Orji would be Jalen Milroe last year. Jalen Milroe started the season, didn't necessarily look awesome the first couple weeks, got benched, and then they realized,
that's right.
Maybe this is our guy after all. I'll be curious to see if Orji is their starter, truly. If he doesn't play exceptionally right off the bat, how quickly are they willing to make a change there? But that's only time will tell. To answer the question, floor and ceiling, I think their floor is still probably eight wins. Like, this team's good enough to win 8 games.
Yeah.
The 4 games they would lose would be against those top teams. Texas, Ohio State, Washington, Oregon, etc. Their ceiling to me is still they're talented enough, and especially if Orji really, or whoever is at quarterback, really excels. They're talented enough to win the whole thing. Their defense is good enough to do it, but that's the absolute ceiling. So anyway, it's week 1. That's a lot of what ifs. Second one is, who will be a big playmaker for the USC-LSU game?
So actually, I mean, I think the biggest playmaker is going to be which one of those defensive coordinators gets their troops in order. Because again, to me, that is the biggest question mark for both LSU and USC is can they play defense this year? USC has to play better defense to compete in the Big Ten. And LSU, if they want to contend for a championship in the league like they have in the past, they have to play a better brand of defense. Both teams have new coordinators. We know both teams will move the football and score and be able to make electric plays on offense, but can they play defense? So I think those two new defensive coordinators being on display against each other in this game will be that'll determine the outcome of the game.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's perfect. Chance for Danton Lynn to really leave his mark right off the rip, which will be fun for SC and Lincoln Riley and company. Use hashtag Big Talk on social media to be featured on next week's episode. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them. Real quick, let's get to our final segment of the day, which is the Knights Guard. All right. I want to talk about Charlotte Christian Middle School football. Todd, why don't you tell the people what's going on at Charlotte Christian Middle School this year?
Yeah, well, I asked or volunteered to help coach our middle school team. It's a 7th and 8th grade team combined. We have 34 kids on the team. The head coach is Greg Olson, who was a former NFL great tight end, who's also a Fox analyst for the NFL. His dad, Chris, who was a longtime high school coach in New Jersey, won a bunch of state championships. He's the offensive coordinator, Chris is. And then Luke Kuechly, who's one of Greg's best friends, is the defensive coordinator, who's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer when that comes up. And then Jonathan Stewart, the all-time leading rusher for the Panthers, and me, we're just kind of extra assistants, fill in where we can. But it's been a lot of fun. So we have our first game, official game. We had a little jamboree last weekend, and the boys played really well, did some good things, but now it's for real. We play Holy Trinity on Thursday afternoon. Holy Trinity is the feeder school for Charlotte Catholic. They have so many kids in their football program, they actually have an 8th grade team and a 7th grade team that both have about 50 players each. Wow. So we open up with the better of their two teams. We open up with their 8th grade team on Thursday at 4:30. It's going to be about 95 degrees here in Charlotte, so conditioning will come into play. And they are a kind of an old school wing T offense. So there's a lot of deception in their run game. They don't throw it a bunch. And so we have to be very disciplined on defense. And Luke's getting our guys all locked in the best he can on defending this defense. So it'll be a lot of fun. Our kids have worked really hard. We've got some really good players, but this will be a challenge right out of the gate with Holy Trinity.
So my main question, because I'm excited to hear, we're going to track throughout the season. I know that you go basically through October here, but my main question heading into the season, as we wrap up episode 2 of this season 2 of Big Talk, do these kids understand the magnitude of this coaching staff?
I don't know if they do or not. I think they do. Certainly their parents do, So right. I think their parents are probably telling them over dinner, do you realize that Luke Kuechly is teaching you how to play linebacker right now? Right. So I think that's happening. I think they do get it. But they're a good group of kids. They've worked really hard, and it'll be fun to see what they put out there on Thursday.
Well, you just think even just the college football side, you won a national championship. Did Greg win one at Miami? Was he part of those?
No, he was not. He was not.
Great player at Miami. Obviously, Kuechly was one of the best defensive players of his era at Boston College. I mean, you just have legends, and Jonathan Stewart, a fantastic
former Oregon Duck.
Yeah,
so we've talked about that in Oregon.
Classic Big Ten. Yeah, classic Big Ten dominance from Jonathan Stewart. So anyway, we'll keep track and keep tabs of the Knights throughout the season. We appreciate you for joining us here on Big Talk with Todd and Noah. We'll be back presented by Xfinity all season long. Make sure you download and subscribe on the NBC Sports YouTube channel and wherever you get your audio podcast. We will talk to you soon. Enjoy week 1, everybody.